Hello viewers, welcome back. This is Literary Goa, the program that looks at people, books, photographs and many things related to Goa. Today we have with us Marylou Zuzarte, who is actually into photography. She's done a lot of food photographs on Goa, which we'll see in a few moments from now. You'll get a chance to view those even if you've not seen her exhibition which she held in Goa at the end of 2022. But her photos are something that talks on the food in Goa. There are many parts to Marylou. This is one of her sides. The other side we'll talk about later. Marylou, introduce your work to us. What made you take these photos? What do you find unique about Goan food?
Okay, a lot of three questions, but a lot to say about it. Thank you, Frederick. So what made me decide to have this exhibition or to display this work? It started with me wanting to connect with my roots, the diaspora background, the diaspora story of Goans who are overseas. And we had a little of this upbringing in East Africa, in Uganda and Kenya, where I grew up. But as we got older and my children started to become curious about my background as well, the introduction of the food and the culture started to be more important to me. So I decided that I wanted to basically go back to Goa and make connections, not just with people, but with the land and the marketplaces and things. So I've always been interested in photography. Part of my main subject in photography are portraits. And I really I love people watching. So my idea was to meet women in the countryside, in the city, in all kinds of job situations, and write their stories, because I've realized that women have a lot to say in not just their life story, but also in their background. So when I came to Goa in 2015.
So you're understanding Goa, if I could put it that way, you're understanding Goa through food, through women, the interaction with food?
Food came later.
Okay.
Food came later. So it started as wanting to meet these women and write their stories. And I think this came from the fact that my mother she said a little bit about her background. She talked about her childhood, but not much. And I think I wanted to connect my mother with Goa. What is the connection my mother had with Goa? And I think this was one of the reasons that brought me here. And that's the reason why I first wanted to photograph women. So what really happened was I made my first contacts, which took a little bit took a little while, because I came at Christmas time and didn't realize how busy people were at Christmas time, and there was a lot to do. But after Christmas, I met the first woman, Petu, and I remember she saying to me, "Why do you want to photograph me?"
There are a lot of charming photos in your series.
Yeah.
And what is interesting is that they deal not necessarily with only elite Goan women, but they're simple folk.
Yes.
The elderly folk. They are not very romanticized pictures.
Yes.
There are hands of people which look old, which look tired, which look worn out almost.
Working hands,
which tell you the story of a hard life.
Yes.
Sorry, continue.
So when I met Petu and she told me about her family in Zanzibar, a very large family. She was telling me about her brothers and sisters. She said, I take Christmas orders and I make a very good bibik, which she served me, and it was amazing.
This is Kolva?
Sorry?
This is in Kolva?
No, it was south and Kotalim. Is it Kotalim?
Kotalim.
Yeah. So then I realized when she was talking about her bibik in her kitchen, she lit up. And she smiled, and all of a sudden she sort of opened up about herself. And I said to her I said, "How about if I photograph you in the kitchen?" And she said, "Sure." That was it. That was the breaking point.
And that was her passion.
Right. So I've got some beautiful pictures of her working, but they're portraits. And I also record at the same time. So while they're talking, I've got the recorder going, because I don't want them to be too conscious. And most of the time they forget even that the camera is there. And that was my first introduction to making contact with the women, and I realized you've got to start talking about food.
This was which year?
This was 2015-16, December 2015 into 16. So this was my then approach, and the idea first was never to bring out your camera and say, here I am. So the meetings would take, it would take some time until you ended up having a cup of tea with them, and then they'd slowly introduce you into the kitchen, and I'll say, okay, what do you like to cook? Or, what's your favorite? I photographed a couple of weddings that way. And most of the time it was individual women. And a very interesting way that I've met these women through sometimes just meeting them on the street, like in the case of Lakshmi.
Where?
Lakshmi I met in Agonda. And that day I wanted to photograph the women picking the cashew fruit off the floor. And so we came to this cashew grove, and it was the driver and I. So we're looking down into the grove, and we saw a path going down there. And I said, okay, how about if we just go down this path? I'm sure there's somebody living there. And it was on the main road. And then all of a sudden he said to me, he said, Madam, turn around and look. So I turned around, and there was Lakshmi in the most beautiful sari, and on her head she was carrying a bucket of cashew fruit. So we immediately made contact, and my driver was the translator. Johnny was the translator for all of this. And by then he knew my project, so he'd explained to them. And she was wonderful. We first went to see the fruit or the juice being extracted. And then I always go back and visit my contacts. That's important. I take them pictures. I have tea with them again. So the next time we went to visit Lakshmi, she was at her home. And that's when she was grinding that masala. And that's one of my pictures of Lakshmi sitting, grinding her masala.
On the big grinding stall.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, but the thing is that you're actually a scientist who has taken to photography.
Yes.
How does that connect? Can you explain? So your field is?
I got my PhD in physiology, and in this research facility, we studied 2 of the potassium channels that were predominant in the heart and kidney. So we did a lot. It was not only just electrical measurements of the potassium membrane potential in the cell, but we also did a lot of cell imaging, live cell imaging, microscopy, to see these channels were involved when they were mutated, were involved in diseases. And so the idea was to understand the pathway of these channels into the cell.
That's extremely theoretical and so out of sync with photography. But
yeah. So basically I did a lot of filming of the cell itself. Yes, it was microscopy filming. So it was down to that level. So it was a lot of videos, a lot of still pictures. This was for publication. So this was I started photography when I think it was 12, when my father first gave me his Agfa 35mm camera. At that time we had rolls,
I remember Agfas.
Yes, and it was black and white, and so you were allowed to take one picture. And very carefully, and this was always my photography, was take careful pictures, think before you snap.
This is Uganda or
This
Kenya?
was in Uganda, yeah. So this was throughout. So even throughout my professional work, I did a lot of videoing and fine detail, paying attention to fine detail, paying attention to not just the person's face, but who's that person, the hands. I've got a lot of pictures of hands in my exhibition. That to me tells a lovely story of the women, the hardworking hands. And sometimes you'll see an old hand, and I find they're beautiful. And on top, like my auntie, she's got a ring on her finger, and she's opening this granadilla. That's my favorite Auntie Jamma's picture. Tells me a lot also about the person. So I take notes. I have lots of notes that I've written. When I come back from a photo shoot, I'll sit down right away and write what I remember of this person.
So you think as a scientist, like science takes care of your left brain and whatever it is, and photography is a creative side.
The artistic side.
Artistic.
Food, for me, because I studied biochemistry, it's very interesting to understand what's going on, not just in cooking, but what are the effects of spices? What's the process when you beat an egg? What's happening to the protein there? So this was my scientific brain side coming in to analyze the food as well. So I'm always analyzing it, actually.
How many photos in all on Goa so far?
Up to now, since 2000, I think about 8,000 I've got
8,000.
now. Yeah.
Wow.
And I've got them all categorized. They have to be categorized as soon as you come in.
What are the categories like?
So there's first category is Goa. Then you start to divide it in the name of the person I've shot. So under that name, then what was the speciality? Was it towards coconuts, like wedding, first day wedding, second day wedding, third day wedding, all of these things. And then I also will tag them. So in case I need pictures of all the women, then I'll just send up the tag, and you have to sort. You have to keep sorting. You have to keep categorizing your work. Yeah.
Which are your favorite photographs? Describe some of them.
Okay, the one of the very favorite one is Lakshmi grinding her masala. That's just that blue of her sari and the gray of the stone. This is for me the contrast. It's a contrast, but it's still a very complementing colors in there. The other one is the masala grinding this on the
small stone.
On the small stone. And this lady, they all got village names, right? So I was always introduced to them by their village name. So Dondu lives in Kolva, and she does a lot of catering. And she's about 70 years old, but you couldn't tell it on her face and her arms. Unbelievably muscular arms, because she grinds her masalas by hand. And I've seen her grind a masala in like 5 minutes. And this is what I wanted to capture, was the strength of this 70-year-old woman getting that masala done. Wonderful, amazing, and that's one of my favorite ones. Somebody mentioned at the exhibition, she said, "I can smell that masala." And that's the effect that I want to bring out. Is I can, a lot of people said, "I can smell that masala," which is part of. This is part of the exhibition where I said the 5 senses of the body. The sight, smell, taste, hearing. What was the 5th one? I always forget the 5th one. Touch, yes. So all of these senses are involved in cooking, especially in the Asian side of the world. In Europe, we don't take the fruit when we're at the market and smell it. We don't touch it. This is very, very important. It's part of the culture here. It's even when we're going overseas and we think of a ripe mango, you can almost smell it. You can taste it because you're longing for a mango. And these are these tastes and sounds and sights that I was longing for in bringing me back to Goa.
Interesting. What you're saying is that you're using food as an excuse to understand Goa, like how I use books as an excuse to understand Goa. But your photos seem to be categorized in a few lots. One struck me as the preparation of food, the other is the market series, and everything that goes in between this full process. Am I right?
Yes. There's a whole series of stories. You have to follow the story. You have to make a story when you go on a photo shoot. What I showed at the exhibition was the senses, the hands, the taste, the mouth. But most of my photography on Goa is market scenes, the salt pans, unfortunately the dying salt pans that are very difficult to find, the mango season, the fenny season, just harvesting, or the rice, growing up the rice, harvesting the rice. So there's different categories.
Wow.
So all of this is basically, I think I've covered everything. The fisherman, the fish market, drying a fish. What I haven't done is gone on a fishing boat. People have hesitated about that. They said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" But it's also
I have a friend who might be able to put you on.
Really? Okay. Yeah. It's not just bringing the fish onto land, it's what those people on the boat do as well. So I was part of pulling in the net. I put my camera aside and joined in and pulled in the net.
The big rampon?
Yes, the
beach scene,
the
yeah.
blazing heat of Welsau, I helped them pull in the net.
This was a part of our growing up. Today it survives in so few places. No,
yes.
It's not even there.
And you have to be part of it. When you photograph, you have not to stand aside as a photographer and say, here I am. You have to be part of it. You have to sit with them on the floor. You have to enjoy a cup of tea with them.
I guess this full story doesn't come out really in an exhibition where a few pictures are displayed.
No, but I plan to put a book together. I have put the book together electronically, but that did not take place because of the lockdown.
Okay.
Things have changed, so I have to go back. And I realized that I'm missing a very important part of Goan cuisine, and that is the Hindu kitchen, which Lakshmi is part of it. But I need to delve more into the Hindu kitchen.
It's much more diverse and it's not fully covered, and it's
yes.
not as glamorized as Catholic food is, unfortunately.
Yes, and I'm one of those people who later realized there is another kitchen.
It's a rich world.
Yeah. So there's a lot to photograph here, a lot of stories to photograph.
You told us the story of how you exhibited in Berlin. Can you just re-narrate it?
Yes.
So you had your first exhibition in Berlin just before the lockdown, right?
Yes, it was. It was 2019, and that time nobody was talking about lockdown or COVID. And it was during Berlin Art Week. And so I wanted to have it in not necessarily a typical gallery, because there was food involved in this whole thing. So there's a restaurant called Zimtenzucker in Berlin that has these beautiful old factory walls. So it's just plain brick. They haven't plastered the walls. And I really loved this media for displaying, because the red brick reminded me of Goa also, the red soil. So I thought, this is perfect. So, and the pictures are always printed in large format, 1.5 meters, sometimes by 1 meter. So they were large format, and I wanted to have these life-size pictures on the wall. And what I did was, as the opening was, I made some coriander chutney, and we westernized it a bit in the sense that we made these crepes or the pancakes and spread the coriander chutney, and they rolled them up and then sliced them. That was one of the introduction to the cuisine of Goa. The other thing I did was I displayed the contents of a masala on a white plate as whole spices on there, and then in the middle had this little bowl with the cover on it. So one of the waitresses went around saying, this is the contents of a masala, and then she opened the lid so they could smell then the masala, and they were blown away. They said they didn't realize how many ingredients and how good the masalas, smells. So this was, for them, it was an opening to, yes, they've traveled to India, they've tasted Indian food, but this was a whole different aspect.
They're seeing it from a totally new angle for the first time.
Yeah. And then one day, because it was Berlin Art Week, we had a little Ayurvedic beauty session where I made what do you call it?
Mehndi?
No, it was gram dal, mung dal, finely ground mung dal, and we used it as a peeler, exfoliant on the hands. And a lot of people came to that, and they said they didn't know you could use mung dal as a scrubber for your body. So that was part of the exhibition. And it went well. I think the curiosity of cuisine, of Indian cuisine, was there.
So a discussion with Marylou Zuzarte would not be complete if we didn't talk about Joseph Zuzarte Murumbi.
Joseph, yes.
Yeah, because that's how we first met.
That's
because one of our friends, Carlos Noronha, who realized your connection to Joseph Murumbi.
Yeah.
Said he phoned me and said, I've come across this lady who's his niece. So for those who don't know, Joseph Murumbi is this vice president of Kenya, the full Kenyan nation, for a short while in the 60s. And he was a freedom fighter. He was a friend of other Goans who were involved in Kenyan politics, particularly Pio Gama Pinto, and Fritz D'Souza knew him and all
That's
that.
correct.
And along the way, he got disillusioned with the way politics was going there and he quit it. Tell us about your uncle, but before saying that, also he was one of the largest collector of African art on the continent, the
Yes.
continent of Africa. So
Yes.
tell us about your uncle, this unusual figure from Goan history, who was half Goan, half Maasai, and people always wonder, who he was. So tell us.
Okay. Uncle Joseph's father is my grandfather. So he had his first wife, my grandmother. I honestly don't know how long they were married. But then he was a businessman, shopkeeper in Kenya for many years. In fact, my father is born, or most of the family members are born in Kenya. And my grandfather had to travel a lot with the goods. In those days in Kenya, you, as a salesman, you brought your wares to the people. And he was up in Londiani, which is north central Kenya. And I don't know when he took on his second wife, or whether it was a divorce and then the second wife, but she was a Maasai woman who eventually had a child. This was Joseph, Uncle Joseph.
And he studied in Belgaum and things like that.
Yes, his father wanted him to have a good education, and by then you have to understand, in those days there was apartheid. There was
In Africa.
Yes, whites, browns, blacks. Yeah. So Uncle Joseph could not fit into either, and this was for in those days. And we were also, as children, it was like those Zuzartes who have the mixed child.
And we Goans can be racist also in that sense.
Massive, very, very, yeah. So Uncle Joseph was sent to India to study. To
St. Paul's, Belgaum?
It was, yes.
St. Joseph's,
St. Joseph's.
Arpora.
Yeah, I think it was in Belgaum.
No, St. Joseph's, Arpora, and then St. Paul's, Belgaum, or something like that. I remember reading that. I don't know.
Yeah, I
might be wrong. Something.
I don't remember the timeline. But he was taken there when he was sent there when he was 5 years old. So for him it was very traumatic. But he eventually finished his studies there and then worked in Bangalore for some time.
I see.
And befriended an Indian family over there. He then realized it was time to come back to Africa because he had missed his mother very much.
This is
and
50s?
Since 5 years ago.
1950s?
This would have been
40s?
40s. Yeah.
Interesting.
40s. But he unfortunately did not get to meet his mother again because she had passed away.
I see.
So this left him, I think, with a very, I think there was some regret, certainly of that. He got into politics then in Kenya, and I remember when at that time he was not vice president, but he was one of the ministers. He would come to Uganda to visit us. And sometimes he'd come with his driver, and sometimes he'd come by himself, but it was always Uncle Joseph. And as children, we were not told how, not famous, but that he was a politician or anything. It was just Uncle Joseph coming to dinner. I just remember wondering, why is Uncle Joseph so dark? It was eventually, when you grow up, then you start to connect.
It's amazing, no? These pieces of history which we are not even aware of. He's fascinating. He's a fascinating figure.
Yes.
And his collection of art, and you mentioned that it runs in your family.
He eventually, after his political time in Kenya, settled in Kenya, south of Nairobi, and he had, in the meantime, was collecting art, African art, and his love for African masks. He has an amazing collection of African masks and old historical masks.
Gone into the museum or something on that?
Yes, they were able to. He has now a room dedicated to him in the museum in Nairobi, and one should go and see it. It's he has done a wonderful job of
Amazing.
preserving some of this history.
This is a story in itself, but we could go on for a long time. I'm so happy that you filled us in onto it. One last question we have time for. Tell a word of advice for youngsters wanting to enter the world of photography.
World of photography, yes. In today's world, it's very digital. It's easy to, off your cell phone, off your digital camera. So you have the tendency to click here and there. And I think for me, it is always know your story, always know the picture that you're going to take. Think twice and always remember that photography is about light. It's about shades. You look at shadows. You have to train your mind, you have to train your eyes, your brain to understand what you're taking through the lens. And I always like to start, and it's always fun to do, is to stand in one place, either on the street or in a cafe, sit nicely in a cafe and watch the people go by and take a picture. For me, that's also getting to know your camera without walking down the street and quickly clicking. So if you stand in one spot on the street, or even at home, if you decide to, let's say you want to photograph a mango, place it nicely, make sure your lighting's there. So you're relaxed, There's lots of fun things you can do to improve your skills. Yeah.
How do people encounter your work, your website also?
I have a website, Marylou Zuzarte dash Zuzarte.photography. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm also on Instagram, Marylou Zuzarte 2. I think once if you click in Zuzarte, you'll come across it. Yes. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your work. It's a lovely exhibition that you put together. I'm so glad that you've shown it in Goa, and you have plans to show it maybe in South Goa also. In
I hope
early
so.
2023.
Yes, in February.
Yeah.
I'm aiming for February. But thank you for inviting me to this interview, Frederick.
That's the least we can do. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.